Hello, my name is Françoise Molenaar, and this is That Fertile Feeling, the podcast. If you've been trying to get pregnant for a while and you feel like life has lost a bit of its spark in the process, then this is the podcast for you. Every week, I speak to experts and peers from around the globe to discover how you can connect to your feminine flow and stop trying so hard to conceive, and how to put some magic back in your life and your relationships. Are you ready to make life just a bit more effortless? Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to a new episode of That Fertile Feeling, the podcast. And I'm here today with a recurring guest, Shereen Öberg. She was just on the podcast 4 weeks ago, I think. Or it was actually an interview I posted that I did with her podcast, the Law of Positivism podcast. And Shereen told me on that, or during that interview, that she's just finishing her thesis on how women use religion and spirituality to cope with fertility challenges. So I thought this merited a bit of a longer discussion today. So welcome, Shereen, on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy and feel blessed to be back and talk to you and to share. It was great to be part of the winter fertility retreat as well, and to, like, just continue following your work and your passion. So I'm super excited to talk today.
Yeah, likewise. It's always good to see you. And for new listeners, so you are the face behind the Law of Positivism website, book, Oracle deck. You're a yoga teacher. Is it a Chinese medicine or Eastern medicine teacher? Healer. Anything else I'm forgetting? As a researcher?
Yeah, I mean, that sums it, the biggest parts up, and also that I've worked as a doula to support birth, and yeah, just continuing the work and support to help women and all people to just live in their highest potential. That's what the book was about, and the oracle cards are about healing as well. So that's my main focus.
And I know, because we talked on a previous interview last year about your first thesis, that this topic of fertility challenges has become a bit of a theme. So yeah, can you share a little bit more about your work in this field and what you are doing now?
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, when we started connecting, I had written a master's thesis on women's experience of infertility and treatment. So it was both aspects within that IVF. And the findings, as I shared, was really interesting because it's so much focus on the physical in the healthcare system. And my thesis was within the field of global sexual and reproductive health and rights. So there was a lot of focus on like how we could improve the healthcare and support around infertility treatments, and how it impacts not just the physical body, but also the emotional, mental, psychological, all layers of women's being. So after I finalized that, I decided to pursue a passion, which is I just been always interested in spirituality and religion and just studying like like my whole life. I think even from when I was in high school, I had the option to study like more advanced religion course, and I decided to do that. And I wrote about Zen Buddhism, and I just always had an interest in religion and spirituality. So I decided to, after my master's, to pursue also a degree in religious science. So I studied that and have just finalized my bachelor's thesis in religious science within the field of religious psychology. So my thesis ended up being a continuation of what I saw and found in the master's thesis, and that translated into a published article in a scientific journal. This is a continuation of how do women cope with infertility through religion and spirituality. So that was my main question in
Mm-hmm.
this. And yeah, that's how we started talking about this, and
Yeah.
interesting to see and how it ties into your work as well.
And what were some of your main findings? And what was maybe the thing that surprised you the most also when you were doing the research?
So my research was again a synthesis like the first one. So I included studies from all over the world. There
Mm-hmm.
was no limitation on location. I like to see it globally because we are in a global time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what surprised me was that there was not a lot of research done. It's really hard with the aspects of religion and spirituality. They are
Mm-hmm.
so intertwined.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, like from my standpoint, I saw spirituality as something that was not like only contained within traditional religion, but it's also an aspect still in religion. So it's a little bit hard, but I didn't find any studies connected to like pure spirituality. Most studies were actually around like based in religious context. But
Mm-hmm.
then within that context, it can be less or more religious, spiritual as well. But
Mm-hmm.
that was one thing. So the main findings were from Muslim and Christian and Jewish backgrounds, the women, some Hindu. And the main, so what I looked into was like interview studies that had already been done
Mm-hmm.
and women sharing their experience. And I use a lot of quotations. I can also share some quotes. But what I found was that the religion and spirituality can both, I would say it was mainly positive outcomes. And I saw that also in previous research, even couples
Mm-hmm.
benefited from having religious coping strategies. And then I also found that there are some cases where it can be negative as well. So if I divide that in, like there's the positive aspects of having a faith, religion, or spiritual foundation is that there's practices that can help you to cope, that relieves this stress and trauma of infertility, and also that you have a community support.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one thing. And then also having more religious and spiritual meaning to the journey of fertility challenges, and having an explanation more than just the physical, that also helps.
Mm-hmm.
But when it came to the negative religious coping, it was also sometimes in certain communities where childbearing is highly considered, and it's like something that is an expectation,
Mm-hmm.
then that could make it harder for the couple and the woman to go through this because you feel left out and isolated. And also when there's objections to treatment like IVF from clergy and from the community, that there are communities that don't approve of IVF, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that made it tougher. But then also, like the last one that we also talk about a lot is the trust and surrendering to the divine was really something that benefited women. So those were like the main themes that I found. And I
Mm-hmm.
would say that it was mainly very positive from what I saw in my
Mm-hmm.
research, that this is something that can really help if you have that foundation or that spiritual support.
Yeah. And I so recognize what you're saying that there's not a lot of academic attention for that spiritual layer. Because my own background, or I'm a researcher myself as well. So with all the work that I do, I love to look at what does the research say about this. I love bridging the spiritual and the academic worlds. And I see that for anything that we do with the body, it's possible. Because you can turn to the nervous system, breath work, embodiment exercises, we can see what that does to the nervous system, and you can directly make that connection and also to fertility. So anything that, quiets down the nervous system. That will have a positive effect on your hormonal balance, and thereby it will also improve your fertility.
Mm,
Um, with mindfulness, I think mindfulness is the thing that's been studied the most. You can speak to
mm,
this as well, but I think out of all the spiritual traditions, like mindfulness is seen as the most non-spiritual one in a sense, and also included. So there are studies out there that show that mindfulness has a positive effect on fertility,
mm,
and both the coping aspect but also the physical aspect, again because it works with the nervous system. But what I'm seeing now is that the things I'm working with, so I've started to work more with ritual, or
mm,
really helping women work with surrender practices. And so, from my own experience, I know how powerful this is and I see the effect. And then I want to explain why this works in the way that it works. And I turn to science, and there's nothing there because I don't think it's seen as a valid topic, because people still like to think of spirituality and the physical world as two separate worlds.
mm.
Is that, do you agree? Is that something you've seen in your study as well?
Yeah, definitely. It's been separated for too long, and now it's time to like merge it together. And there's definitely, so what I could see in my research is that turning to prayer and scripture, for example, in prayer we have worked with a lot as well. It's about shifting one's attention away from having all of the like responsibility from yourself into
Mm-hmm.
a higher being, whatever you believe in. And if you don't feel like you belong to a religion, it doesn't matter. It's just that if you have that foundation that there's a source of life and there's meaning behind everything, then, and also that we are in communion through prayer,
Mm,
then that really, then you feel like, okay, at least I can do that and feel like I can give it also up to that source. So yeah, many said I do my prayers so I can cope with things, for example, and then
mm,
rituals and fasting, because it was actually everything from visiting healers to visiting shrines and holy tombs, attending religious services. They were all used as a coping and also to increase the chance of fertility, pregnancy.
mm,
And also it shifted the focus of women to focus on the source or God, and also supplementary healing besides the treatment. So
mm,
it's and a beautiful thing that I really, besides one's own prayer, the intercessory prayer, the prayer that you receive from others,
mm-hmm,
it's so healing because it's a comfort, and it's giving like that emotional support, even if it's not face to face. And also the one giving prayer also, like this was
mm,
scientifically, stress levels and things go down. So it's so beautiful. And they expressed like how comforting prayer was and could be. And many people in the studies with faith rather turn to like the spiritual support of the community, or
mm,
like the teachers or clergy.
mm-hmm,
Um, and that was the best counseling for them instead of going to a psychologist. So when they had that in their background,
mm-hmm.
it seems like that was more supportive.
Yeah.
And one about that sacred plan and sacred meaning,
Mm-hmm,
it's it's something where there's a plan and will, and it depends on how your view is, of course, and but there was an acceptance more,
mm-hmm,
because we always say like we have to surrender and accept things as they
mm-hmm.
are, and
Yeah.
this could help to, and that's not something that you learn, it's something that you embody. Like if you go into life as a sacred path, and you don't have to attribute it to anything, but you feel that, like this woman said, I just have faith in God and I know that it is the will of God, then it's, it's said in many religions that you get exactly what you need. It's not a punishment or anything bad. And of course, those notions came up in the negative coping, like this is a punishment, this is
Mm,
karma. But instead of seeing that I have been given this because I can bear it,
mhm,
you will get what you can bear. And it's in that darkness where you find the light. So I'm still listening again to this beautiful book, The Secrets of Divine Love,
mhm,
Sufi book. I had to listen to it again because I need to integrate it. Such a beautiful book. I talked about it last time we spoke too. And it's that we get these challenges to come closer to the divine. That's why many people who go through trauma or any challenge in life sometimes open up to a
mhm,
new belief structure, a new faith. So it's kind of like a doorway opens, and of course when you're in it, and I'm totally like sensitive and humble that when you are in it, and if you're listening to this, it's, I mean, when you are feeling grief and despair and in that emotional state, it's hard to like, because this is not about thinking rationally either. It's about like that full knowing. So how do we turn that the challenges of life into something that can like fill us up with something that is eternal instead of filling it up with something that is just changeable? That we always come back to that in yoga as well.
mhm.
Just seeing, it was really beautiful to read. I see that there's a lot of strength in spiritual and religious coping for women going through this and any reproductive trauma, I think.
Yeah. And yeah, so I hear you say there's so many different mechanisms. There's with prayer, there's even a physical mechanism there that actually works with your stress levels. And then there's the community, the sense of belonging, which I think is so important and which, especially in Western society, we've lost. So having people out there who are praying for you. I just got a voice message the other day from someone who told me she was going in for a transfer. And she had, I think, a group of 20 or 30 women who came together every week to meditate for her and burn a candle, creating that circle of light around her. And I thought that's so heartwarming to not have to do this by yourself and to know, regardless of the outcome, this is what I have here on earth. I have this level of support and this level of, yeah, people have that willingness to show up for me. I think that can
Mm.
be like a really deep source of healing. Because in the end, we all want to belong, right? As
Yeah.
humans, we want to belong to a community. And then there's the surrender aspect. So really, yeah, knowing that it's not your fault and being able to see it as part of a bigger, I don't want to say plan, but bigger path, and that you don't know where it's leading you, and you just, yeah, you cannot control the outcome. So you just have to walk along and see where it brings you. And I've been on that path myself this year in another area of my life. So I know it can also feel like I said, okay, I jumped out of from the top of a mountain into a river. And I thought it would be nice to be flowing with the river. And now I'm in the river and I don't know where it's going, and I feel like I'm being swept along. And so there's also, it's scary not knowing, but
Mm.
yeah, it can also be surrender again. And, and then there's the negative coping
Mm.
aspects that you mentioned. Um,
Yeah. It was, so it depends on like the community and the faith, of course. And sometimes if you have a strong faith and you feel like you've done everything right, you should be like blessed with everything in
mm,
life. And so unfortunately, there was some guilt and feeling of punishment for some, and feeling like, what have I done to deserve this?
mm,
And I think that's part of the journey. Like that can be in grief. Like, you go through these different feeling, also angry and like disappointed in life in general. Um, and in different cultures, since this covers a lot of different countries, it's not just the Western countries. And also in the Western countries, there's a lot of pressure on the woman. It could be like both, it could be male infertility, it can be female infertility. But it's always like this pressure on women and stigmatization on women, which I saw in my first study. But these cultural and religious norms, for example, in this pressure to have children. So the inability to meet the cultural norm of having a large family was distressing, and this was from the US, a woman from a Christian background. And then feeling unheard in one's prayers, that you do, like, I occasionally complain to God, why don't you respond to me? So it's like this, you start having negative relationship to the life source and feeling like, okay, I'm unheard. Does God even exist, or is there anything else? Or is it just this? And then the last one was the objections and the religious prohibition. In Catholic context, for example, IVF is not permittable. People would put shame on it. It's messing with the divine to do that, as if the divine has not given us all the tools. It's a weird. Some things are created by God, but some not. It doesn't make sense. And then it was a lot of. So that puts like women in a spot where, like, okay, what can I do then? What if this is my only way? I mean, we have to know that for some women, IVF is the only way. Something with the fallopian tubes. How would you otherwise?
Yeah.
So that was really sad. And then, people sometimes can, although it seems like hard times strengthens people's faith, this can also want them to turn away from their usually when I saw that, usually when not in the synthesis but in a different study, usually when you're not happy with your religion, it's usually because of the community that you're not, because of the faith. So
I was actually just going to ask you about that because I have this thought that's coming up now. But so you mentioned there are also sort of religious norms on having families, and I'm wondering, with your own background in religious studies, so of course fertility has always been connected to the goddess, but I'm wondering, because fertility, I think the goddess was more than just fertility. The goddess was also about life, just just the fact that we're here on earth experiencing life. And I'm wondering, like, with the shift to this more masculine religious, that occurred about 3,000 years ago, whether we sort of detach the idea of life from the idea of fertility, or the idea of consciousness maybe from the idea of fertility. And now fertility is all about, for the woman, being a woman is all about bearing children, and it's not about so much about your ability to fully experience life in all of its facets. And if we maybe thereby also made it very difficult to women to understand, like, what does it mean to be a woman if I cannot have children? Does that make sense?
Definitely. It's like assigning, that came up in my first study too, like feeling like you had a vision as a woman, what your life should be and your purpose. This existential crisis comes up if you feel like, I might not be a mother. And it's so part of that female archetype, even in the old traditions. I mean, not all goddesses had children, but like it was really revered. And I was just listening to this. I love author and academic Marguerite Rigoglioso, who's written about divine conception, and that the first thing was the separation when this, before it was like more of a co-creation together, creating life. If you
Mm.
look at the mythologies, it's life came out of herself. So it's the separation and the norms, the culture, it really has taken, yeah, it feels like it's not a sacred thing. And when we don't see conception and pregnancy and birth as something sacred, it's just a physical thing that happens, which is crazy, because
Mm.
how would it not be sacred and a spiritual practice
Yeah.
to be in that cycle? Because it's life. It's been downplayed for so long, and it's medicalized, and it's seen as something that is medical rather than like this. Someone else was talking about this as well. Like, of course, women were revered and the goddess was revered because it's the source of life on this earth, at least.
Mm.
And this parthenogenic, like the self-conception, is not there anymore. But from the one source, there was parthenogenesis, life was created. So, I mean, we can take it back so far into like the whole creation.
Mhm.
And still in healthcare settings, in medical care, there's only, according to my first study, like there's only focus on the physical medical aspect of infertility.
Mhm.
So I suggest that if the healthcare providers and the healthcare system cannot integrate, which maybe differs from country to country, right? But I live in a country where there's nothing spiritual about the medical system,
Mhm.
zero. Maybe when it comes to terminal illness and palliative care,
Mhm.
they can bring in the spiritual aspect and priests.
Mhm.
And we have those that are counseling and helping grief groups and all of this. Why could we not try to have a group support system, even if people don't have faith? I mean, if you are experiencing infertility, you can turn to wherever for support, because I think most women don't find it in the regular
Mhm.
care. Now there's women like you who do give that support, and that's thankfully, because otherwise they would be very, and I know that it differs from country to country, but here it would be like a big thing to have support groups for any reproductive trauma, for example.
Mhm.
Or if midwives could, because midwives do help women who have had stillbirths or
Mhm.
traumatic deliveries, or
Yeah.
there is support, but not for, let's say, miscarriage or abortion or infertility, anything else. Or yeah.
Mhm.
So I'm just seeing that there's a bridge, and why don't use the resources then? If there's no resources within the healthcare system, why don't allocate some? So that's my next project, to look into, like what are
Mhm.
support organizations people are there actually, and connected to the spiritual religious support.
Yeah. I'm also wondering now, with everything that you're saying, so we've turned conception into this physical process, and you mentioned very rightly that it's one of the big mysteries of life. Like we like to talk about it as if it's all a physical process, but even science hasn't completely figured out like why conception does or doesn't work, right? There's so many things that we don't know about it.
Mm.
And I'm wondering maybe why so many women get stuck is because they also, or why they feel so frustrated and not being in control, has to do with that they actually feel that there's a bigger layer there that they can't grasp, and that is something that you can address or get to with the spiritual opening. Um, yeah. So
That,
yes, yeah, some thought that
yeah,
came up.
it's something that can, well, research has already shown that it improves life quality, so there must be something to it. And if you have that little seed within you that, okay, this might be like spiritual practices, like ritual ceremony, anything that you feel like. It doesn't have to be tied to any faith.
Mm,
If you are open to it, why not try it? And it's not a process that happens from one day to another. It deepens your own spiritual path. And it's not going to be something that only benefits you in coping with the current situation. It's like for all of life,
yeah,
like shifting the lens, like tuning into a different frequency. That's why we're doing what we're doing, like with the healing and all of that.
yeah, yeah. That's so important. These are the tools that will set you up for life,
Yeah, definitely.
including, the pregnancy, the anxiety that can come with pregnancy, the, can I say, the trauma of postpartum,
Mm,
or the big life transition that is postpartum and
mm,
everything beyond. Or maybe, if it never works out for you, being able to also transition to that stage of not being a mother.
mm, definitely.
Yeah. Um, if someone wants to start developing such a practice,
Mm.
where would they start? Is there something? So you mentioned a lot about, you talk a lot about prayer.
Mm. I love devotional practices. I have a lot of Gemini in my system, so I love studying. You know how jnana yoga is a part of like our spiritual practice. So it depends on your own where what gives you that energy. In yoga we have these different paths for a reason. Some people are all about karma yoga, some people are about bhakti devotional yoga.
Mm,
Whatever is I really love devotional because it feels like you start creating a personal relationship, and then the studying of different traditions can also help you. But I think just the practice of meditation, prayer, and focusing, if you are in this, in like coping with
mhm,
fertility issues, just finding also support groups, turning to prayer, or finding like a spiritual community, working with someone that can help you in rituals, someone like you, because I mean, I think you give those tools in all of your work as well,
mm,
and working with the energetics like we spoke about, and everything that you put into will make a shift, even if it doesn't feel like that in the moment. It just takes time, and you will
mm,
deepen, you will go in deeper. See this as an opening and an invitation to find a new way of being and living life,
mm.
turning it into something that is working for you and not against you.
It reminds me of something. Now that I love that you mentioned the devotional practice. It reminds me of a couple of years back. Before I started IVF, I felt like I was so focused on the things that were not there, so not having a baby, and also tuning into how that made me feel my body. So there was this constant tightness because I was reaching for something that wasn't there. So the feeling of lack, scarcity. I
Yeah.
realized I really wanted to tune into that feeling of abundance. So I thought, okay, where in my life do I can I turn that feeling of scarcity into abundance? And for me, it was actually money because I was earning quite well. And from a young age, I've been taught to save a lot of money. So I always had a lot of money in my bank account. And I realized I can also, this is where abundance can happen. Instead of just holding on to all of my money super tightly, I can start letting, allowing money to flow through me. So I get my salary every month and I can also decide to give 10% to a good cause,
Mm,
really tuning into that feeling of I'm allowed to also give. I don't just need to receive and hold on. Things can flow through me. And so I didn't have a lot of time. I thought I can't volunteer, but we do have a house. So that was in the midst of the refugee crisis here in the Netherlands. So I also put up our house for as a temporary shelter for refugees who came to the Netherlands. So we had a couple of them staying in my home, which I
mm,
thought would be super invasive, and it wasn't. Like I had this one, oh, it was awesome. We had a guy from Syria,
mm,
um, and he would cook me lunch every day.
Mm.
The best Syrian lunches. I think he wanted to do something in return, or he didn't like my food. No, no, he was such a nice guy. So it was a great experience. We also had a guy from Yemen. So being able to share your home and being able to, for someone, like the guy from Yemen, he traveled by foot for 3 months all the way through Europe. He took the boat from Greece, from Turkey to Greece. He experienced some really horrible things along the way. And then to be able to say, you can come into my home
Mm.
and give that, and really tuning into that frequency of giving, of I have all of this abundance here that I'm willing to share. Um, that just came up as an example of what that devotional practice looked like for me. Really,
That is, and that's karma
where
yoga too.
karma,
Devotional and karma yoga for sure.
yeah,
And how much abundance does that open up? I mean, that's amazing. And you're doing it for the purpose of giving. That's amazing. So
yeah,
that actually does help to shift the way also the focus, like what do I want? What can I receive, like you said,
yeah,
and to give. I mean, the best feeling.
yeah. I think that's for me what a lot of also in the work that I do with my clients. A lot of the work is just about okay, seeing where you're at. And you can call it a frequency, an energy, a state of mind, and also seeing what else is possible because there's always a whole array of states or energies or frequencies where you can be. But it starts by looking at where you are now and also having a vision of where you want to go and really embodying that and feeling what would it feel like to be there? What can I do? What are the short, the small things I can do every day? Well, you've written a whole book about this, right? So what does
Yeah.
law of positivism say about that?
No, it's definitely about be having a grateful state of being. That's one thing, and
Yeah.
have seeing all the abundance to open up to more, and also being, yeah, focusing on that expansive energy, like you said, and living in your highest frequency, feeling, seeing also where our programmed thoughts and habits where they come from and going to the root is really important. So everything that we are carrying and then something like this happens in life, it will affect, but it also helps us to face that shadow, to like increase our frequency, because
Mm,
if that door was never open, it would
yeah.
still be there, and we're carrying it in our soul, we're carrying it into the life after this. And so sometimes the challenges help us open up, let everything come up to the surface. And the I see that the spiritual path is not just the light, because it's so much about going into the darkness and into the
Mm,
to
yeah.
uncover what is there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As we're talking, I have this image come up of a practice that I'm going to develop. One of the things I do in surrender practices is bring women into that fear, the fear that this will never happen for them, because that, underneath everything, that's the biggest fear.
Mm.
And I'm seeing now I'm going to add an element, not just see the fear, because so okay, spirituality or what you found in your study is that positive coping happens when you can see that there's a bigger plan. So I'm
Yeah.
thinking I'm also going to add an element there of really helping women emphasize, okay, so what if this never happens for me? What is the bigger plan for me then? And
Yeah.
start seeing, it can be with pre-writing or really tuning into your subconscious or the higher self and seeing like, okay, well, so if this isn't meant for me, then what would be meant for, or what might be meant for me? Yeah.
I think that that's one thing, to reconstruct and to see something else rather than just having one path. Like, what else could, instead of focusing on the lack that would be in the future of not having this, what could be abundant instead? So,
Mm.
and there is a lot to be abundant, even if it doesn't happen. So, yeah, I love that. Can't wait to see what you
Yeah.
develop and share as usual.
I'm going to be interviewing a voodoo priestess in 2 weeks' time, I think. So I was reading a little bit up on what voodoo religions say about fertility. And I saw, or what I read online, is that there is this fertility goddess, Mami Vata. So she's the goddess of the water. And she's called upon by barren women. She was barren herself also. And
Mm.
it's actually that fact that allowed for her higher spirituality. And so this is something I don't know yet what the meaning of that is. What my intuition says is that, um, becoming a physical mother, it grounds you, it brings you to earth.
Mm,
Um,
true.
so there might be that dimension as well, like with not having physical children, there could be another spiritual portal that opens up to you.
Mm.
It's something to discuss with her as well. Yeah.
I love that. I really see that. And yeah, I mean, in the Abrahamic traditions, there's also so many barren women, and it's all about this self-creative that happens. So there's many stories. We can talk about that in the next
Mm,
podcast we do about the stories that there are.
yeah.
Maybe that would be fun to share, to see like thousands of years of stories around this, and what that has led to, and
Yeah.
how those women can be inspiration.
Can you share just one for now?
Yeah, I mean, there's this just Mother Mary's mother, Hannah.
Mm,
I mean, Mother Mary was also divinely conceived, and it's always a spiritual aspect to it, that they are longing for a child. Also, Sarah and Abraham too.
mm,
Then all of a sudden, someone is on a spiritual quest in the desert, and this divine intervention comes in, and it's this divine child that comes to the picture. So, and that's also like, usually the women are much older, like they're so mature that it would be physically impossible. So it's also a story like of miracles, but also of that self creative power of women. So they divinely conceive
mm,
without the male. So,
mm,
and that's like recurring in many mythologies. So there's many of these stories actually, and it does give inspiration and like even deeper meaning into how important that was, also that divine conception in those stories and mythologies.
mm. Very interesting.
Mm.
Something to definitely follow up on.
Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
love.
thank you so much, Shireen, for coming on the podcast again. As a final question, what would be your one core piece of advice for anyone who's trying to conceive or struggling with fertility or pregnancy loss?
I think that, as within all spiritual practices, to turn that, like we said in yoga and meditation, to turn off the external world and to go within, and that this is an invitation to go deeper within, and find a communion with life and source in some way, and find what the blessing is in this as well, which is hard, but be sure that there's one thing that also in this book brings up from the Quran. It's what what the divine knows we don't know. We cannot know all.
Mm,
That's, we're veiled. So even if it's hard to see the path forward, we can trust that there is a path for all of us, no matter how life unfolds. And you will have synchronicities, people, things, events that will come into your life that you will understand was also through this process, and how important this process is
mm,
to almost venerate this experience, which feels dark, but it's in that darkness that you really can find your own light and the light of the divine.
mm. Maybe that's the divine conception then.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Shireen. Where can listeners find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, so it's Law of Positivism on Instagram and Facebook, YouTube, my podcast, everything with the same name. And I
Mm,
have a book, The Law of Positivism, Living a Life of Higher Vibrations, Love and Gratitude, and my Healing Oracle, which focuses on the 5 layers of healing. So the cards are actually more a guide to going deeper into your healing and spiritual path, more than an oracle. It's very practical for everyone who wants to tune in and to the art and to find healing and guidance.
Do you have the oracle deck there?
I do. I have it here, actually. I can bring it. Here is the oracle card deck.
Yeah.
And do you want me to draw a card?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now I have it, actually, it's been translated into Swedish. So this is the Swedish version that I'll translate. And I'll tune in for everyone who is in this call and in this journey, that we will have the healing message that you need right now, and that you feel divinely embraced and supported always. That's my prayer for you. And this is really, this is with my thoughts, I co-create with the divine. So exactly what we talked about, this co-creative, it's a lot about like shifting our thoughts into prayers, maybe into like affirmations, that is putting out the seeds of what you really want to create in life and with the universe.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I hope that can be a guide for us today and throughout the week.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your research, for sharing all of your knowledge. Beautiful conversation.
Thank you for having me again, and thank you for your work and everything that you're putting out. It's so important, and you're helping so many through this process. So we're happy to have you in the world and in life.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you also to the listeners for tuning in this week. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on Instagram at thatfertilefeeling, or email me at francois@thatfertilefeeling.com. I always love to hear from you, and I always get back to you, and hope to see you back next week. Thank you for listening to That Fertile Feeling, the podcast. If you liked what you heard, then please head over to your preferred podcast player and subscribe to the show. It would also be great if you could leave a review and rating so that other listeners can find the show easily. And if you think that anyone you know could benefit from the materials on this show, then go ahead and share it with them. It would be much appreciated. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Bye, love.